And I remember dreams that I had over there. And it was vivid. And we're talking, I was in Vietnam in 1968, which is, I think, before you guys were born.
Definitely.
And I still remember dreams that I had over there, and as vivid as if I had them yesterday. Although they're now getting, now certain memories are getting really ragged at certain ends, but so some of the.
Was that about a war in the dream?
No, it was actually the one that I remember. Was actually not. It was about coming back. This is, you're talking about not remembering dreams.
Yeah.
I actually don't remember dreaming about the war while I was in the war.
Yeah.
I remember dreaming about the war when I got back, and for a long period of time, I used to have a nightmare that was, I had been called up, even though long after the war was over. I used to have a nightmare, which there was a civilian, and I had been called up to go back to the war, and it was just awful. And it's odd because it was not so much going back to Vietnam, right? Because these are two different things, right? There's two. It wasn't as if I was dreaming to go back to Vietnam. I was dreaming to go back to the war. So it's here that I started dreaming about it. I don't remember dreaming about it there. No, some of the things I remember, I was thinking about, because your professor told me about this, and I was kind of thinking about the things I've told people before about the war. But things that stay are not simply the war stories, and those are there. I can tell you a couple of those if you're interested. But there's also other things, though, because I was well, let's not dramatize this too much. I was in a place called Marble Mountain, which is about 5 miles south of Da Nang, maybe 8 miles south of Da Nang, and it's on a beach. So you're talking to a guy that never saw a jungle. If you were to say Vietnam had jungles, I'd say no, Vietnam had beaches. That's all. That's what I know about it, right? And it's now, I guess, a resort area. From what I've heard, that it's now a resort area. So I was on this beach, and we were at a relatively more or less safe area compared to what other guys had done over there. What happened to me was like an afternoon sometime here at USC, walking over, right? So it was an odd place that I was at, and so I remember stealing. It's a bad thing because it's a cliche from a movie. I wrote a story once about how two friends of mine, and I went up to the division headquarters, conned them out of 4 surfboards, drove them back to where we were at, built a lifeguard tower, and set up surfing in Vietnam. And we had it in the back of one of these 3-quarter PCs, which I used to drive. So when you used to go in Vietnam, and in Vietnam everybody hitchhiked, right? You either hitchhiked on the road or you flew in helicopters, right? So going into Da Nang, you got all these guys going into Da Nang, and we're going out there. And we had the surfboards in the back of the truck. So they were like, and it was these guys who were coming up out of the field are looking at this truck full of surfboards going that way. And they're just lined up. It's like pandemonium as we drove by because it was like the most bizarre thing they had seen. So so I remember getting those surfboards. And I remember, I was thinking this too. I remember a couple of the Vietnamese working on the base, and I remember some of those. And Chu Hoi, do you know what Chu Hoi is? No. I was just wondering if he had mentioned these things. The Chu Hoi program was that the Americans would drop things, and they would invite the Viet Cong, which is mostly those folks I was fighting. I wasn't fighting the NBA, but the Viet Cong. And they would invite the Viet Cong to come to our side.
Oh.
So the Chu Hoi program, right?
Yeah.
And so they would come to our side, and then they would end up in different battalions as guys who would go out on patrols with us. And I remember working with them, 3 of these Chu Hois, who we had. It's odd the amount of respect we had for the Viet Cong. Really, it's an odd and unusual kind of myth, but so we had these three guys working with us, and I remember going out on patrol with them, two of them one night, you know. And I'd been there for a while. I'd been there maybe 6, 7 months, right? And I was aware, and it's a night patrol, and we know what the hell we're doing, and we know that we're not in a dangerous area, but it's not safe either. And so we set up in this field, this ambush in the field, right? We don't want to do anything. And I had given one of the Chuhois some gum. You want some? Yeah. I said, no. And he's over in a hole over there.
Yeah.
And we're all quiet, kind of doing what we're doing. And you can hear him chewing this gum.
Wow.
It's like, and it's like, what in the hell are you, man, shh, quiet, VC. No VC. And all that. And, you know, it's like, yeah, of course he knew there weren't any there, and there weren't any there, and he was just out there doing this thing. It's odd moments like that come to mind, or the translate. There was a man who was acting as a translator for the battalion, and he worked with what was the intelligence unit at some point. And I remember we used to hang around and talk to him, you know, he's this school teacher, he's older than even any of the grunts there in Yavaz. He's this school teacher, and we used to talk about the war. And he's a just nice, wonderful, kind man who was in this thing. And you could get a sense that he really didn't want to be in this thing. Mm-hmm. You know, we were talking about getting drafted. He said, "Oh, you were drafted?" I said, "Yeah, I got drafted." "How long?" I said, "Couple of years." He kind of laughed and he said, "I got drafted too." And I said, "How long?" He said, 9 years. I mention this as being kind of unusual because Marines were never allowed to go into the cities, right? The Army and the Air Force could go into the cities. They could go into Saigon. They could go into Da Nang. They could wander around. But it was illegal for Marines to do that. Even the village that was outside our base camp, the only time we could go through there legally was on patrol, right? So we had an odd and distant relationship to a lot of the Vietnamese. We couldn't. I used to drive around Da Nang, you know, but I could never stop and wander around because I'd get arrested, right? So there's always a way in which Marines had this kind of, or at least enlisted Marines of my rank were always at a distance. Mm-hmm. So that's why these stories about talking to these guys are kind of keep coming to mind these days. But yeah, then there are the other ones. You know, there are all the combat stories, right? There are all of those, which are always bizarre. So.
How many combats were you involved
in? Not as many other people, but often enough, maybe a half dozen times, maybe a little more. I mean, where people were really shooting in my direction. So, and mostly small arms fire. We never got mortared. We got over. The biggest thing I was ever in was the battalion base camp, which is about 600-800 people. It got overrun. So that meant if you've seen these movies where people got overrun at night, so that they blew holes in the wire at 4 different places, and something like 21 guys died that night, and maybe a considerable bit more were wounded. And it was I remember it as a long 3-day thing because. I can actually even tell you the date when it was over because I celebrate it every year. On the morning of May 5th, myself and about 4 or 5 of us were sitting on the beach, leaning up against the building that had been blown up. We had been fighting for, that night we had been fighting for at least 8 hours, and we'd already been in other things for 2 days, so it was all over. We're sitting, it looked like a bad, we were laughing, it looked like a bad World War II movie, because we were up against something, we had helmets. And over there, right over there, are 3 dead BC soldiers, and we're watching the sun come up out of the South China Sea. And it's like that moment at which you know, okay, I've gotten through this one, and there's that exhilaration that you're alive, and you're sitting on a beach, and it's warm, and it's May, and most of the guys you know are alive, and that's what happens if you fuck up, because you're going to be dead. And you go, okay, this is a birthday. This is a birthday.